Hi, my name is James. Welcome to Kingsfine Woodworking. Today we're going to cover the unboxing and assembly of the full-size Flagship Sled version 2.0. If you have bought our Flagship Sled anytime recently, then you'll know that we have gone to an updated version that has a few small changes over the original version. It's a little bit better than the original version, and I'm going to show you exactly how to put it together. It's actually a pretty quick process. Everything does have to be flat packed in here in order to ship it, but the assembly method is actually pretty fast. We do pack it in it's a clean shredded recycled cardboard, so it's good for landfills, or if you are the type of person who composts, you can always compost it as well. And let's get right into it here. These are all of the parts and components for the sled once it's been unpacked. And everybody who buys the sled gets a link to download the plans for the sled. This is it. I've downloaded and printed these, and there's a little QR code there in case you don't happen to have the video. You can use the QR code to link to the video if all you have are the plans or you forget where the video is. And if you see all the different items that are in blue, those are the items that are discussed on each page. It tells you what it is, we assign a number to it, and we give you the dimensions for it. It's also got all the complicated dimensions where we put all the holes and things like that should you decide to build one in the future. And this page also will tell you exactly where to set up your fence to get this to work. Alright, so we want to start off with a flat surface like a table saw using two straight edges, and I've squared them 90 degrees to each other, and a framing square is plenty accurate for this job. They don't have to be dead square. And we're going to start with the bottom center board, which has the T-track already installed, and the front of the sled is going to be away from you, so the T-track goes all the way to the front of that. These are the bottom outside runners. They're all labeled so you can see what they are exactly. And one's going to go on each side. Next is the upper outside board, which needs to fit like this on top of both of those perfectly. So we're going to get them close there, which is what I did, and we're going to put a little bit of glue on these. I have Titebond's quick set glue. I think it takes 15 minutes to set up. And cure, you can use any glue that you want here. It makes no difference at all. I just maybe need to let it set up a little bit longer, or you don't have to wait as long depending on the glue type that you use. So just get a good coat of glue, and we'll push that bottom outside runner all the way to the corner. Push that upper outside piece all the way to the corner on it. Slide the sled lower middle board right underneath it until everything's tight up against the T-track. And that's it. It's actually a foolproof assembly. You can't mess up because the top board simply can't go any further to the left because the T-track is in the way, and the T-track is already installed. Now we're going to repeat this on the other side. Same technique. We're going to put glue on both sides really well here. And grab the upper outside board. They're labeled, and there's pictures of them on the plans. And we're going to line that up. Now, it's easier to let that hang outside just a little bit and then slide it in perfectly with another flat board. That way it comes perfectly flush with the bottom. And we'll get some weight on that. And we're going to let that sit and dry up, of course. Now there's just two more boards you have to glue up, and then we're done. This is the upper inside. So you see the upper outside goes on the outside of the T-track, and the upper inside goes on the inside of the T-track. And once again, they're labeled. So we put some glue on this. Overall, this is a pretty quick process. This is the toughest part of the build, and this probably takes real time, maybe 5 minutes, 6 minutes to do, to glue everything up. And then you might have to wait 15 minutes before you take the clamps off of it, the weights off of it, and then you're good to go from there. We can put the fences on, and you know, it's essentially done. Just make sure it stays up tight. One thing you do want to do is watch it, because I've noticed some people have put this thing together and then just walked away, and the board has slowly slid out of place and then ends up gluing securely somewhere else. So you could put a pin nail in it to hold it steady, or you can just, you know, babysit it for 10 minutes or 5 minutes until it's secure, until the glue starts to set up. And I just want to make sure it's nice and flush up there, and watch out, like I said, so it doesn't slide away. If it does, do something like put a clamp in place or put a pin nail. You've got a variety of options to hold it steady so it doesn't move. So that's it. So I've let this sit up for about 15 minutes, which is all it takes for this glue to cure. If you use something like Titebond 3, you might want to leave it for an hour. It's not really under any load. Okay, here's the back fence. You'll notice that this sled version does not have a removable section to it. That ended up binding and causing problems with different climates. So we removed it. There's the front fence that goes away from the operator. Fence is already done for you. You just have to install them basically. And what's important about this one is that it doesn't line up there. It lines up right here, such that the zero clearance sections from the sled base and the fence itself line up. And you'll notice the side on your left is wider than the side on your right. In the hardware kit you will find the set screws. The set screws go into the miter bars. They have an Allen drive or hex drive on one side. And so you'll put them in by hand about as far as you can. And then you'll switch over to a hex driver or an Allen wrench, and you'll just put them in all the way until they're flush with the other side, or maybe they stick out just a tiny bit. We will fine tune exactly how much they stick out once we put them into the miter slot on the saw. So going to the miter slot, we will make sure these countersinks are facing down, and then we'll just do little micro adjustments here to get it such that the miter bar fits tightly in this miter slot without wiggling side to side like this, and that it also slides forward and backward. Put the screws in the miter bars so that they're going opposite of each other. The left miter bar goes one way, the right miter bar goes the opposite. That way they're held in the slot even if the screws come loose. Next, the directions will tell you how far away to set the fence from the blade. This is important. Let's make sure you're cutting right down the dead center of the sled. And this is how we mate the sled to your saw, by setting this dimension. So we're going to put a little bit of space underneath these miter bars to raise them up so they're slightly above the surface of the table. Maybe it takes a penny or two, or a dime and a penny. We want it just barely above the surface so that when we apply glue to it and set the sled on it, the sled is gluing to the bar. It's not going to empty space between where the sled is and the bar is. And space these back 2 to 3 inches, just make them equal on both sides. And then we're going to put a little bit of glue. We're going to use CA glue, and the sled's going to go down basically right there, making sure that it's flush up against the fence and it goes flush to the front of the saw at the same time. So we don't want to use much glue, because if you ever change saws in the future, you want to be able to pop these off, unscrew them, pop them off, and remate it to a new saw in the future. That's important. So I just put 1 drop between each of the screw holes. That's more than enough to get it to bond temporarily to the sled so that we can pick the sled up and screw it in. So we'll start here, and I'm going to put a little bit of accelerator on the sled where it's going to fall onto the miter bars. This will help it adhere quicker. I'm keeping it flush tight against the fence and lowering it slowly to be flush with a line on the front edge of the saw's cast iron surface. So flush there and flush along the front. That's important. That should start out with the whole thing being really very square, so you have very little adjustment to do. We'll put a little weight on here, and we'll wait just a few moments for the CA glue to cure. Since you have the accelerator, it probably cures in 20 seconds or less. If you don't have the accelerator, maybe leave it for a couple of minutes. And then you're going to want to move the fence out of the way, lift it up real carefully, and make sure it stayed stuck. If not, you have to do it again, but make sure that stayed stuck, and that's it. Then we're going to go ahead and screw these down. So the screws are in the kit, of course. And we'll just drive these in. I don't pre-drill or put pilot holes in for these screws. And you want to be careful not to over drill them. I just drill them in a little bit, and then I like to finish with a screwdriver so that I haven't over drilled and stripped them in the holes. That way we get maximum strength. If you're not sure how to handle the screw guns so that you don't go too fast or strip these out, then you can just put the whole thing in by hand as well, no problem. And that's it. So now we want to quickly sand the bottom of the sled everywhere, and we'll sand the miter bar too. We'll sand the corners a little bit. Get all the rough surfaces off. It's okay to sand this. Sand the rough surfaces there too. And we're going to apply a paste wax over the whole base. Paste wax is going to allow it to become very slick and to slide easily on the table saw. And I like to cover the whole sled in paste wax, and if you would rather do lacquer or something like that, that's fine. I like to do the bottom at least in paste wax because the paste wax sort of impregnates the wood, keeps the wood sliding better for longer. So once that's done and I've buffed off the extra paste wax, we'll set it in. We'll just kind of see how it slides there, and it looks like it slides really well. Now it's time to install the fences. Remember, the fence has to be lined up right there so that the zero clearance sections from the fence to the base line up, and we want to make sure the fence is straight. We're going to check it with a straight edge. If your fence is not straight, now's the time to correct that. It's not uncommon for the fence to become a little bit warped. That happens all the time with plywood. I make sleds here in the shop for custom projects, and 5 minutes after I make the sled, the fence piece is already a little bit warped. That's standard. Nothing to freak out about. The way to handle it is you just simply clamp a straight edge onto the back of the fence like this, and you'll go through all the procedures with that clamped on and remove it at the end. This chamfer goes in the front, face down, and the wider sections on the left, narrow sections on the right, and it goes right there. So as I was saying, if the fence isn't square and you have to clamp on a straight edge, then once you have the whole sled assembled and you have the fence squared to the blade, and then you fully secure the fence by putting all the screws in, then you can take the clamped straight edge off and the fence will stay straight. Typically anything that has a warp or a bow in it, once you have secured it really well with screws or glue, if that's the type of project that you're doing, it will stay put. Alright, next we're going to install a screw on each end, and that will allow us to make any adjustments that we need to make in order to square the fence to the blade. Alright, so we're putting the second screw in on the far right hand side here, and I'm using a number 8 countersink bit to put in this pilot hole, and I'm using a 2.5 inch long number 9 deck screw. I think deck screws are fantastic for a lot of woodworking projects. Now we'll tackle the front fence. It's a little bit easier if we scoot the sled base around 90 degrees so that we can access the front. The front fence is the side that's away from the operator, and this gets attached by T-bolts into the T-track. That's why the T-track had to come all the way to the very front of the sled. But it doesn't come all the way to the back of the sled because we got to be able to put T-bolts in and out for use in the future if you want to. So I'll put those on a little bit, and then we can fit it onto the front. So in normal operation, that's all that's going to hold this fence on is these couple of T-bolts. But for building the sled, this isn't anywhere near enough because the sled has to have a lot of work done to it in cutting and adjusting, so we have to put screws into this front fence temporarily. If you fail to do this step, then the moment you go ahead and cut through the sled base, it will no longer slide in the track. So we want to put at least 6 screws along the entire base, and these need to be pretty serious screws. Where the wood is single thickness here, the base, an 1 5/8 screw is fine. Where it's thicker than that, like 2 thickness here, 2 thickness pieces of plywood here, we want to probably use a 2 inch or a 2.5 inch screw. I'm also using a deck screw for this. And there's the 1 5/8 screw. We want to screw these in tight. We want them very secure. This has to be a rock solid connection. It can't be loose. They can't be halfway in. If you find yourself partway through the building of your sled and you realize that your sled no longer slides after you cut the base in half, it's because you didn't put these screws in tight enough. So put them in tight. It's pretty simple. You just put them in, secure them, and that's all there is to it. And you can take these out later. We'll take them out once the sled is all done and the back fence is secure. For now, the back fence just has 2 screws in it because we may have to adjust it. Alright, there we go. Okay, now we can drop in the zero clearance inserts for the base and the fence. They line up basically like that. I've used different types of screws for each one, so it's easy to tell them apart because the ones in the base are a little bit shorter. They're the black screws. And this is how they'll basically move. You'll be able to slide them up next to the blade, whether you're using a thin kerf blade or a regular blade or a dado blade, whatever. Alright, once those are in, we're going to just go ahead and install the flip stop onto the back. So it comes all put together here. This is a custom one that we had made. This is another one of the changes over the original sled. We no longer have wooden stop blocks. We've actually gone through a few iterations of stop blocks, and we've kind of ended on this. This is a flip stop with a micro adjust, and it allows you to get up right close to the edge of the blade if need be. It's a very tight fit to push the bolt in there, and then when you are securing the nut, this is a lock nut, do not over tighten it. If you over tighten it, it's not going to move. If you over tighten it too much, you might damage it. So don't over tighten it. It should be a little bit snug, but it should be able to move freely. Maybe a little bit of resistance, and that's basically it. After the original wooden stop block, which grabbed both sides of the fence, we had an aluminum flip stop, which is nice because it flipped, but it came about an inch short of reaching the bottom of the fence, which is fine for thicker boards, but not for thinner stuff. So we moved to this. If you like our content, hopefully you'll take a moment to click like on the video and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us grow. All right, and finally we're going to put in the 3/8 inch wide screws into the side. These are for the micro adjust. And what I like to do is to let me show you up close here how this works, but there's a crosshairs kind of built into this stop, and those will help you do the adjustment process. So it's all manual, but it's really very accurate. So I'll probably turn a corner up to the top one. We'll kind of make a mark where the top corner is, so it's just easy to see from a distance. You don't have to get up close to it to see it. And if you take and you spin that in by one full turn, one full circle, that goes in by a 1/16 of an inch. Out by one full circle, comes out by a 1/16. In by half a circle, goes in by a 32nd. Out by half a circle, goes out by a 32nd. In by a quarter of a turn, goes in by a 64th. And out by a quarter of a turn, comes out by a 64th. And you could even make a micro adjust like maybe halfway between the two. That's 1/128th of an inch. So it's real easy to get a very fine-tuned adjustment. And so instead of the original stop block, which kind of fit over the fence, this thing slides in T-track, which gives it a lot more flexibility. Like I said, it doesn't interfere with the safety box that's in the back like the original stop block did. It's not finicky like the original stop block was. So I just kind of like to put it in place here and then get it situated. We have a little bit of forward and back flexibility. If we don't, it doesn't have to be in one exact spot only. But I'll set that up and I'll just line it up flush to one side. And this just gets screwed directly into the base. I don't put any pilot holes in here either. And we want to be careful driving these in as well. We don't want to over tighten them and potentially risk stripping the screws or stripping the wood where the screws go in. And we'll put these in all the way across. And then we'll fine-tune the tightening with a screwdriver. That way I don't have to put it all the way down with the screw gun. And then this will just slide back and forth, and it's got two locks to tighten it down, so it's pretty solid. And the micro adjust is on the bottom. So that is it for the stop block. We also sell these stop blocks separately on our website. If you buy a sled, it comes with this, but we sell them separately. We have 4-inch tall stop blocks that work for 4-inch or taller fences, and we have 3-inch stop blocks that work for 3 inches or taller, and they flip up out of the way when they're not in use. And they come all the way down to almost the bottom of the sled so that we can cut even really thin pieces and still use the functionality of the stop block, which is nice. A lot of stop blocks end up being an inch short of the bottom of the sled, and so thin pieces will slide right under them. Okay, the next step is to go ahead and make our first cut all the way through the sled base. I will be putting a safety box on the back of this in the future. I haven't put it on quite yet, but I will here shortly. Now remember, if you haven't screwed that front fence down now, it might rack, but we did screw the front fence down securely. So first thing I'm going to do is test it. I have a real accurate square here, and I'm going to test to see how close it is. And quite often you can use this, and if it's close enough, or you can make a very small adjustment, and that's all you need. You don't necessarily have to do the 5-cut method. So I've zoomed way in on this here. You can see I'm looking at the carbide tooth. It kind of points to the left, and my square is kind of dinged up, but I'm just barely scraping the square right there. So I'll come all the way to the opposite end of this square. Now this is a Kinex square that's accurate to 1/1000th of an inch. So I'm sliding the sled forward to come all the way to the opposite end of the square. And we'll grab that same tooth that points that direction. And we'll zoom in, we'll slide, and you can see it's also just touching the edge of the straight edge there. So to me, this is super accurate. This is probably accurate to within, it's probably not to 1/1000th, but it's probably to within a couple of thousandths, maybe 3/1000ths, and that's far more accurate than you'll ever need. And so there was really no need to do the 5-cut method. If you do need to, I have a video on it, and I'll put a link in the description below. Once we're satisfied with the square, we can go ahead and finish installing the screws all along the bottom. That'd be a minimum of 5 screws. 6 or 7 might even be better. These should be all the way in and tight. You want to put a pilot hole for each one, and that's going to hold the fence on securely. This is the safety box that goes in the back, and that's basically what it looks like. We used to use acrylic for the top of these so you could see through, but that really never worked. The acrylic, it's plastic, holds static electricity, and that really, the first time you make a cut, it's just clogged with sawdust and you can't see it. And then sometimes that acrylic will take a bump or a knock if you set the sled down hard, and it'll pop off. Glue just doesn't bond great between acrylic and wood, so we switched this to a wooden top. Whole thing's made of 3/8 inch ply. I like to put glue, and then here again also some pin nails. Pin nails will basically hold it in place nicely until the glue dries. But because of the design, the way it's all held up here, it's locked in pretty tight. It really becomes a very solid box. Once everything is pin nailed and glued, we'll set that aside to dry as well. And that's just the safety block that we're going to put on the back. Once the safety box is dry, we'll just use CA glue to glue it in place on the back fence. I like to use a little bit of accelerator on the fence itself, and of course the CA glue on the box. That just helps it to cure instantly. I want to line this up flush with the top, or maybe a teeny tiny bit below there, but flush with the top's ideal. And that's it. Just press it on there, and I'll spray a little bit more of the accelerator down the sides. That'll soak into the wood and down in there and get the last little bit of CA wet and activate it. And that's all there is to that. Now you can do a lot of operations without the front fence, like cutting much larger pieces than you ordinarily would be able to. So now we'll take a moment and we'll adjust the zero clearance inserts to get them up next to the blade. I slid them up to the blade, right to the teeth. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put this picture frame triangle on, and we're going to give it a try. So it fits onto the sled, and it slides all the way back to the fence on the sled. And the holes allow you to use some bolts and attach it with star knobs. And this is a stop block that makes the whole thing work. The stop block, according to the plans, has a dado depth of 5/16 of an inch. So if I push the ruler all the way into the stop block, and then I slide the stop block up to the picture frame triangle, that gives the exact distance that the ruler is away from the edge of the triangle. Then I'm going to slide that forward, making sure the stop block stays in contact with the picture frame triangle and making sure the ruler is buried all the way in the dado. And I'm going to bring the corner of the ruler right up to the blade. I want a right facing tooth to be right at the very peak of the ruler, because we're going to cut the ruler off right here. This basically is the 0 mark. If we're making a measurement for a picture frame, we want the 0 mark to be right at the right edge of that blade. And we'll install some screws. I don't want to sink them fully because I don't want to strip anything out because I don't want to make another picture frame triangle. So I'm just going to sink them in about 3/4 of the way, and then I'm going to finish those up with a screwdriver. Here again, I'm making sure that the ruler is buried in the dado fully, the whole 5/16, and I'm making sure that that stop block is pushed against the picture frame triangle. That gives us the exact offset distance that that ruler is. That ruler sticks out off of the right side of the triangle by exactly 5/16, and using the stop block as a gauge, that helps me get that distance away from the edge of the triangle and makes everything work perfectly. And here I am securing down those screws a little bit better, and I'm going to have to deactivate the brake on the saw stop because I'm going to cut metal. Now once I've done that, I'm going to just chop that off. Just go nice and slow. Aluminum cuts very much like wood. It doesn't harm the blade at all. And that's cut off at 45 degrees. We don't need that cut off piece because you're not going to make a teeny tiny little picture frame that's only 1 inch long. Your picture frame is obviously much bigger. This just gives us a measurement from the blade back to what size you want this thing. Now, since I have a saw stop and I don't want to necessarily have that blade come into contact, even slight contact with that metal while I'm cutting, so I'll take the ruler off, take it over to my chop saw, and cut another 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch off of the edge of the ruler. That way, once I resecure the ruler, I'm going to file it so it's not so sharp. Yeah, sometimes when you cut it, it's got sharp, jagged edges, and we don't want to get cut on it, so any file works nicely for that. But this way, when I'm making cuts in the future, that edge of the ruler is well away from the blade, and there's no way that it's going to cause a problem. So I want to put these things back in by hand, the screws back in by hand. I want to make sure I don't strip, and they're going to go track right back in the same holes. Everything's going to line up exactly the same. My ruler is going to be offset like it's supposed to off of the triangle, and you see I have a gap between there and the blade, so the blade will never come in contact with the ruler when I'm making a picture frame. And we don't need that material that was lost because picture frames are always bigger. Okay, so now I need to attach a clamp to the stop block. That's going to clamp the stop block to the ruler so that we can measure our wood. So when we're cutting a frame, we'll use the stop block for the frame, and that'll give us, frame pieces that are the exact same size. We set the stop block once, cut, both pieces of frame, either both the left and right side or both the top and bottom, because those two have to be matching pairs. And there, it locks in everywhere. Alright, so that's the picture frame triangle. It's done. Let's jump to the last jig or component that will go on this sled, and that is this miter function board. This will turn this sled into effectively a miter saw with the ability to cut angles, any angles that you want. So I'm just going to chop the corner of this off. It lets me get the digital angle finder right up to the edge, and I've marked the layout for the holes. We're going to drill those, and we'll put our bolt in. That holds it. You bring this thing back to the sled fence like you did the other jig, the picture frame jig. Secure that. That's how that rides in there. And we want to make sure that this clears the blade on the right hand side. If this doesn't clear the blade, then you can't glue down the digital angle finder because you cut it off. So if it doesn't clear the blade, chop it off. And you'll notice that if I was to tilt the blade now, it's going to cut that in half. So that's why we have to have a second hole about 1 1/4 inch away there. That's laid out in the plans for you. And you would use the second hole if you're going to make a compound miter cut, because this particular sled can make compound cuts. You can turn your blade at a bevel, a 45-degree bevel, and at a 45-degree miter using this. So you can make some pretty amazing cuts with this sled. Alright, so we got the 2 holes set, and now we're going to glue on this digital angle finder. We want it flush to both edges. That's why I've got those other little blocks there, kind of giving me measurements to get flush to the edges. And I'll put some CA glue, not too much. That's probably a little too much, no big deal, but it glues this really well. This ABS material glues really well to the wood. So does steel. They all glue really well to wood. And those are kind of, I'm using those boards kind of to give me a guide. And then I'll spray a little bit of activator on there to give us an instant cure. And next I'm going to attach this. It's called a miter blade, what I'm calling it. And we'll attach this one as well. Now this one, we don't want to slide it this way and attach it because you're going to block that battery cover. So we'll just slide it up to this point and attach it. And those things are basically giving us the bearing surface for the wood we're going to be cutting a miter on. You'll see how that works in a moment because we're going to use it. And we're going to put that in. We're going to make sure that stays exactly flush with the blade. We'll check it here, holding everything up flush tight. It's important to do that because that's kind of part of your accuracy of the whole system. A little bit of spray. And we're going to glue this to the front. And this is going to be the bearing surface for the wood that you're going to cut. We'll put some CA glue here. And this thing's under no real pressure. It's just kind of a backstop for the whole thing, even though this glue is actually pretty strong. You don't have to worry about it being, not strong enough or too weak. And we'll line that up there, hold that in snug, and give that a little bit of glue, or a little bit of accelerator, I mean. And that's how that works. So we just can dial it whatever angle that we want to cut. Turn it on. It's at 0. You can tear it, reset it at 0. Once it comes all the way back to the back, it stays at 0. And move this up to whatever angle you want. There's 45.15 degrees, accurate to the 100th of a degree. And that's 0.00 degrees, as it should be. Now let's put this in place and see how it works. Once again, a washer and a star knob holds this in place. Make sure that the jig is back flush tight against your fence. And tighten it down. Alright, so we'll loosen the lock knob on it, bring that up. That's how that works. And we'll do a test cut here at, let's say 45 degrees. We'll see how that works. It's pretty accurate, so it'll take a second to get it exactly 45, and then we're going to go ahead and lock down the lock knob. Now obviously the lock knob is not the strongest thing on earth, so you're not going to want to go knocking against that wood. Just kind of set it in place and hold it still. And then you see it sticks off the end of the sled, which is nice to have a removable front fence. And we'll lay our wood down there and we'll give it a cut. And we'll go take a measurement and see just how accurate that miter cut is. Nice thing here is you don't just have to do 45. You can do any angle you want. But let's check 45 and see what that looks like. Checking it with a good quality square hair, combination square, and it's spot on. Get a little bit closer, I think, so you can see it. I'm holding this still. My wife's holding it, and I'm trying to film it to give you an indication. But that digital angle finder is extremely accurate. 100th of a degree is a little bit overkill, but whatever. It's nice to have. If you get the sled from us, it comes with that, of course. Everything comes with it. Picture frame gauge and or picture frame jig and the miter jig as well. This is a piece of picture frame molding that I have cut. It's got the picture frame dado cut out of it, and the top is sloped in. It's kind of a little walnut picture frame we made some of. And I'm going to show you how it works. So we'll set this up here. And it can be really long. It can come off the back end of your sled by 6 feet if it need be. You start with the long pieces of molding. You cut one edge at your 45, and then you bring it to the other side, and then you're going to adjust your stop to whatever length that you want. That's why the ruler's there for measurements. Let's say we want this at 5.5 inches. We'll bring the stop up to that point, and then we'll take a cut. You can hold it down. You can use the clamp and hold it down. And there's one piece of the picture frame. If I were to make, I'd make 2 identical ones, one for the top, one for the bottom, or however that goes. And then we'll prep for the next piece for the top. I'm just making a couple of small pieces because I want to test it and see how accurate or how nice this picture frame comes out. You can cut pretty small pieces on this. And we'll cut that off. Probably should have started with a longer chunk of frame, but that's all I had left, and I didn't want to make any more picture frame molding. Let me get the and my blade is so dirty. It's kind of fraying the top end of this wood. All right, so there's that, and we'll take a look at it. We'll measure it with the against the gauge here. We got that tight, and we'll take a look up close. So I get it to focus. Sorry, it's hard to focus this camera up close. And there's that. You know, it's perfect. This is a perfect picture frame. And this is done with, you know, a speed square and real simple squaring. And so this is what I'm trying to illustrate. You just don't have to have the 5-cut method necessarily. You don't have to get anything down to the thousandth of an inch to have, you know, perfect results. Even if I had a hairline gap in that wood where it met, glue would fill it. But there was no gap, so it works fine. You know, when you're done, you just put your sled back or your front fence back on, and that's it. So let's take a look at another product we developed for the sled, and that is a stop block for the back. It's a flip stop, and the nice thing about this flip stop is that it has crosshairs on the side, both sides, and it comes with a 3/8 inch by 16 bolt in there. And the 3/8 by 16 means it's 16 threads per inch. So if we take this and we mark the top of it, or, you know, any one corner, doesn't really matter where, and then you can see the crosshairs on there. If I was to turn this in all the way by one full turn, that moves it in by 1/16 of an inch exactly. And if I turn it in halfway, that moves it in by a 32nd. And if I was turning it in a quarter of the way, that's a 64th of an inch. And we could even do fractions in between, like 128th of an inch. So it's a real accurate way to do a real precision adjustment. And so let's mount this onto the sled. We have to mount the T-track on the sled first. So what I like to do to get an exact position is I'll just go ahead and secure that to the T-track, and I'll set that up with a T-track in a spot such that this comes flush. See, that would be too big of a gap, and if we put the T-track too far back, well, this wouldn't fold flat. So just get it so that it folds flat, and that's your spot. That's probably common sense, I don't know, but I just thought I would mention it. And once you have that in the right spot, then we're just going to screw in the T-track. We've gone through a few different types of stops over the past year, trying to dial this in and you can get just the perfect tool for the job, and I end up having to make my own. But I really like this stop. I really like the function of a flip stop, and there are a lot of good stops out there that are just solid that don't flip, but I like to leave the stop on there and flip up out of the way when I'm not using it. It means a lot to me, because then I can keep an accurate spot marked, move it out of the way, cut something else, then put it back, and then recut the same thing I was cutting before. So that's it, and then this will slide back and forth on here to wherever you need it for your stop. You've got the micro adjust function, and see, this comes all the way to the bottom of the sled, which most stop blocks don't. A lot of them stop, you know, an inch before the bottom of the sled, like these. And it's okay for thicker wood, but if you're cutting a thin piece of wood, that's a problem. But this will cut thin pieces, no problem. And with the micro adjust function, you know, you slide that up, and of course you can flip the stop up out of the way when it's not in use. So I think it's kind of a handy tool. We're going to sell these separately too for anybody who might want some. This one's for a 4-inch fence with T-track on top. I think we're going to sell shorter ones too, like for a 3-inch fence. We might even sell them in a couple colors, I'm not sure, but we have these in stock available right now, and these actually come shipped on all of our new sleds. And what you see here is the complete package. Everything in this is included. But all this comes included with the sled package if you were to buy it from us. The picture frame jig, the miter jig, the stop block, all this stuff. So there it is, the full package. That's what it looks like. It's all done. Hope you enjoyed the project, and thanks for watching.